Hi guys, I'm Kristen. Welcome and welcome back. So today I'm going to be sharing some young adult fantasy books that I think adult fantasy readers or people who usually only read adult fantasy can still get like a good reading experience out of. Now, I'm not getting into the whole YA fantasy, is it good, etc. I'm not touching that can of worms, but I will say that I have noticed from other channels that I watch, other readers I know, that a lot of people sort of tend to be aging out isn't the right word, but sort of maybe not finding the same experience or the same like positive experience that they were having with young adult fantasy books now at this point in their reading journey. And I think this is so interesting for me personally. I feel like I like overread a lot of YA fantasy when I was like first getting back into reading a few years ago. And I wonder if that's the same or if it's like there's the things that YA fantasy provided adult readers are being met with like romantasy or new adult genre or whatever, that then the things that are kind of repetitive or a little bit annoying or a little bit age like written for a younger audience aren't really living up anymore to some adult readers. Or maybe you are an adult fantasy reader, you've never really done YA, but you're curious about some like really good ones that I think would still work for you. I'm also going to share a couple YA fantasy books that I would like to pick up to see if they too could work for me, that I'm willing to give a try based on other people talking about them. Oh, we're also just totally going to ignore like the pile of sheets and duvets behind me because it's laundry day. Okay, let's jump into the recommendations. First one I'm going to share here is a book that I haven't actually read in a really long time. I did read it when I was reading like in the height of my YA fantasy reading, but at the time it felt different from all of those other things, and that would be Raybearer by Jordan Ifueko. Now this is actually a duology. I have not read the second book. I heard like nothing kind of about the second book and decided not to continue. If you're okay with like some loose endings in the ending, this is a great sort of book to pick up as a standalone. And I think that this is one where I feel like it is subverting some of the standard tropes that we see in YA, and because of that, it works as like a good experience about identity and melting pot cultures and like unique expressions of identity and culture, and that's what I remember. So in this book, we are following Terry Sai, one of the only main character names that I actually remember. And Terry Sai has a mother who is a witch, and she is conceived for the pure goal, or for the exclusive goal of killing this like crown prince. So then when she becomes an appropriate age, her mother sort of wishes this of her, and she's magically forced to go through with it, and she's put into a situation to sort of she enters a competition kind of to become one of the crown prince's close counselors kind of thing. But I think, as I said, it subverts some of the tropes that we expect. I think there's once you get into it, there's some things that you're kind of going to assume are going to happen based on the setup and once you get into it. And I think that the author did a really good job of going around those and doing something a little bit different. And I think overall, a lot of adult readers kind of get something out of the messaging that is going on here. So again, if you're okay with some loose endings, I definitely think this is worth picking up. I can't say anything about the second book. I have never read it, and I certainly have not been pining over what happens next in the last 3 or 4 years since I read that book. It was a very satisfying, conclusive read on its own. I also am going to recommend a recent read for me, and that is Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. Now, this is a huge book, so if you're like, well, obviously, Kristen, everyone has read this. I just recently read it. So if you too are an adult fantasy reader who has never picked up Strange the Dreamer, I think you should give it a shot because it's such a beautiful reading experience. And I don't necessarily mean the writing. I listened to the audiobook and couldn't really focus on that. But it's beautiful in the sense of we have this just pure gold character in Laszlo Strange who has some tough things happen in his life. He's definitely the odds are set against him in his upbringing and his life experiences, and he's just so hopeful and positive. So I'm going to pause there and tell you about what this book is about if you have not heard. In this world, Laszlo is sort of a librarian, and he is obsessed with the city of Weep. And it's this like ancient city that no one has heard from in hundreds of years. And circumstances arise that Laszlo creates the opportunity to travel to the location of the city of Weep and see what is going on. Why has no one heard from them in however many, like 200 years or something like that? There's a girl, she's blue, it's beautiful. So yes, there is a romantic component here, which is a really big thing in YA romance or YA fantasy that tends to or can put off adult readers, but I think that the author did it in such like a lighthearted but still deep and very like innocent and pure way that for me as an adult reader just felt was just like a truly cherishable, delightful experience to read, even though like it gets really heavy. I just thought it was such a beautiful experience of reading this gem of a main character, Laszlo, and being in his mind in this like hopeful, positive output. It made me be in such a great mood while I was reading it, even though it gets like the ending is not so positive and uplifting. But it was worth it for the experience of when I was reading it. So if you're sort of like an adult fantasy reader that wants like something that's still like really, really well developed and a beautiful world and a beautiful story, and just like a lush reading experience with like a little bit of like hopeful positivity and positive outlook on life, you don't want something like heavy and dark and adult and whatever, this is the book to read in between. Check it out. Now, a very commonly recommended YA book for adult readers is Fireborne by Rosaria Munda. I totally agree with this, and I said it at the time when I read it. I told all of my like in life reading friends as well. Really, really pushed this at my local book club. But this is a book that is kind of like an Anastasia retelling set in a very post-revolution Russia feeling kind of a setting with dragons, but with a very UK feeling backdrop. So we're following Annie and Lee, and they are both orphaned as part of this like uprising where the everyday folk, the common folk, rose up and from within and took down the like dragon overlords that were within this society. And what we are left with is something that looks a lot like our early communist Russia. And Annie and Lee were orphaned during that uprising, but in very different circumstances. So, well, sort of around the time. Annie was from a family who were essentially serfs, and Lee was secretly one of the children of one of these dragon overlords. And they both wind up at the same orphanage under circumstances and have like this really, really intense, they're each other's person, kind of family, but not family, kind of a dynamic. And they are being trained to become these dragon riders that are eventually going to be part of the like ruling, policing sort of part of the new regime. Now, yes, there are some critiques to, you know, their age and the role that they're playing in the society. If you can believe it, they were actually supposed to be younger when Rosaria Munda originally pitched this. But there are critiques. There is still angst. So it doesn't subvert any of that. Like there's going to be a little bit of angst. There's going to be a little bit of like pining, mutual pining, as well as like confused feelings and some, you know, like sort of love triangles, but not in a really horrible way. But I think why this book is going to work for adult readers, if you're okay with all of those things like still existing within the book, this is a really, really great discussion about government and the difference between the ideals of a government and the execution of that government. In that you can have really great platitudes and really great ideas and philosophy, but that sometimes the execution doesn't really work as idealistically as what you imagine or what you intend out of a new government. And this one really, really analyzes the question of, is this new regime, is this new republic better than what came before it? And in some ways, obviously, yes. But in other ways, question mark. And I just think that for someone who's like not into reading about government or politics, like I like politicking, but not politics. And for someone who's not into that, I thought that the conversations that were had were really, really well done in this book. So again, if you're okay with like some pining, some romance, whatever, you should check this out. It's so good. Also going to recommend Little Thieves by Margaret Owen. I don't know if you know this, but I'm a huge Margaret Owen stan. I know I started out with Margaret Owen with her Marcel Crowe's duology, and I generally recommend this. Like, love it, love it, love it. But it's a little bit more tropey, a little bit more angsty, and a little bit more YA feeling. Whereas I think Little Thieves does a really good job of balancing, I think, technically being a YA fantasy, while still kind of like almost giving you the new adult vibe. This is, if you haven't heard me rave about this book or series in the last 2 years, but if you haven't heard or you forget, this is a Goose Girl retelling, which isn't really important to know, but it's a Goose Girl retelling. If you're looking for like a fairy tale retelling for a readathon, this is one. It's a Goose Girl retelling, but told from the usually villainous perspective of the sorceress. She's not really a sorceress, but in the traditionally like the bad person who steals the identity of a princess. But in this case, she's using the identity of a princess to moonlight as a jewel thief in order to save up enough money to pay back the debt she has accrued to her godparents, death and fortune. I just like love that setting. I love that setup, and the execution is even better. So what we are following is our main character Vanya, who has some problems, and why I think this was such a good book and one that will work for adult readers is I think it's a really wonderful execution of somebody's core beliefs and the events that happen to them in early formative years that create that sort of like lasting internalized view of oneself. And then how that internalized view or that core belief shows up in the way that you react, respond, communicate, carry yourself, or believe certain truths about yourself. So I think this is a beautiful exploration of core beliefs and traumatic experiences and how they shape you. Now, you could say that about a lot of books, right? A lot of books are doing that. It's the backstory component of every book. But this one really, above and beyond, does an exceptionally good job of showing a very flawed main character and showing you why they're so flawed. So you get it. You still are like, oh, that was a bad choice, Vanya. And over the course of the book, there is wonderful character growth, but the character still like remains true to themselves. They don't like suddenly become this Aelin paramour of self-righteousness and justice. They're still like flawed and troubled, and they still make bad choices. They just maybe make more good choices than before. And they make those bad choices in moments of particular stress. It's perfection. It's perfection. There's great ace representation. There is a wonderful relationship that is explored in a non-angsty, non-typically YA way, if that is what you're looking for. If you're like, I'm open to a relationship, I just don't want it to be like YA angst. This is not that. So just absolutely beautiful. There's 2 books out already. The 3rd one is coming out, I think, later this year. Margaret Owen is also releasing short stories in the meantime that like bridge the gap in between the 2nd book and the 3rd book. The 2nd book is also, but heart-wrenching. And you should read Little Thieves. Why haven't you read Little Thieves already? And then the final one that I want to share, which I think was like, I'm almost like questioning whether or not this was technically listed. I think it was like priced as an adult fantasy, but one stuff as like a YA fantasy, and that is Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. And this book is following a main character who is in a magic school where the school is actively trying to kill you or kill the students. And it's like a no teachers, self-learning magical school that exists in this void, but it's imperfect. And the like monsters that are drawn to the magical kids can still get in. And then the school itself is sort of like sentient and not always trying to help you. It's like actively making things harder for you. And we're following Elle, who is like predestined and prophesied to become this like evil sorceress. But she doesn't want to. And she is kind of accidentally befriended against her will by the school golden boy hero, golden retriever savior type, Orion. I don't care if you read the second or third books, to be honest. I did still like the second book. I never talked about the third book, and I think that you should read into that. Even if you just read this as a standalone, you're going to want to pick up the second book, to be honest, with the ending, the way that this one ends. You're going to want to, but even if you don't read the second book, if you just read this first book, you're going to get a scathing critique of privilege. And Elle is a very angry main character who just wants to be befriended. And I think what this is going to give you is, if you ever felt like a little bit alone and misunderstood in high school, this is the book to read, to just catharsis over that. While additionally getting a scathing critique of privilege, class structures. And that's all I'm going to say about Deadly Education, to be honest, because I don't have a lot more time, and yeah. And now for the YA fantasy books that I intend to pick up in the coming months to see if they work for me, because honestly, a lot of YA has not been working for me lately, but I've heard enough things about these books that I'm willing to give them a shot to see if it's going to be a little gem in the mind. I don't know where I was going with that metaphor. I'm going to give these a shot to see if they work for me. So the first one here is Once Upon a Broken Heart. I think this is Stephanie Gerber. I've never read any books by them before, so this is me checking them out for the first time. And I just have generally heard that this is like a warm, lighthearted, delightful book that subverts some YA tropes, or that maybe doesn't subvert them, but that like is like very like on the nose, or like self-aware of the tropes that are at play here. I actually am currently reading this book, so I'm not going to say more than that. I made this list and then like never got a chance to film it, but here we are. So the setup for this book is that we're following a main character who is in love with this boy and finds out that he is about to marry her stepsister. And so she goes to one of the fates of broken hearts or something like that, and he begs a favor or makes a deal to stop the wedding. But he doesn't stop the wedding in a way that she thought through, and events unfold that in all of this, she is sort of depicted as the hero, when really she was the one that caused the problem in the first place, and we follow events from there. So I generally have heard that this is like a really great, like fun, lighthearted kind of good time. I'm looking for stuff like that right now in my life, and I'm going to give it a shot, or I am currently giving it a shot, to be honest. Also, I want to read Iron Widow. This is a book that I've heard talked about over and over and over again. And every time I'm like, oh yeah, that does sound good. But I feel like I first started hearing about it when YA wasn't starting to work for me. So I was like, it's YA, not feeling it. But I consistently, channel after channel, hear amazing things about it that makes me consider, or that have convinced me to not care about the fact that it's YA and give it a read anyway. And so we're, I think the like Pacific Rim vibes is what I've heard about this. It's in a world where there's like these like mech suits, and you're paired up with like a man and a woman in these like mech things. And what happens is that like the man is generally the pilot, and he like drains the woman's life spirit, something like that, in order to power these things. So the woman often dies. And our main character's sister is one of these people who dies on a mech ship suit, something like that. And she decides to go for revenge. I think there's some poly rep here from what I hear, and I just heard it that she's like a kind of unhinged, angry, revenge-driven main character. And I am always up for a good revenge story. But again, I just consistently hear that it's like a really, really, really good book. So I'm going to be checking that out as well. And then the other one I talked about in another video recently, and that is Divine Rivals. We are following a main character, or I think maybe it's dual POV. It's two like writers or journalists on the front lines of a war. And even though I decided last year that I wasn't going to read it, everybody loves it. Everybody loves it. Everyone's still talking about it. And I think it's like a good representation from what I hear about the challenges of, obviously, of being a reporter on the front lines of a conflict, and the difficulties that those people have in representing like the realities of what's happening, as well as the danger and the risks that they take, not even being part of the conflict, but just to like report on, to share the realities of the conflict. And I've heard it's a really great love story. It's a duology. I'm going to give it a go. So those are my YA fantasy recommendations for the adult fantasy reader, as well as the ones that I intend to check out in the coming months. Let me know other YA fantasy that you think like do something a little bit different, that don't have like the typical standard pet peeves that a lot of people have with YA, or that are just like do something so well, explore like a concept so well that even readers who don't typically read YA would be willing to read it just to explore the concept or whatever it is that that book does. Let me know your other like solid YA recommendations. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.